So how can we overcome passivity and fear when it comes to Christian dating and Christian relationships, and even in your search for the one God has for you in your future marriage, if He does indeed have marriage in your future? So as I was thinking about a story of passivity, one story that came to mind in the scriptures was David and Goliath. In this story, you see that David was the only one who wasn't being passive when all these men were just hanging out on the sideline, waiting and scared of the enemy that was facing them. So point one, if you want to overcome passivity and you want to overcome fear in Christian dating and relationships, you have to first know who your God really is. So when you read through 1 Samuel 17, you see that Goliath was taunting the men of Israel, and he was spewing out lies towards them for 40 days. And all these guys were just scared on the sidelines listening to the lies of Goliath. When David saw what was happening, he was appalled at this and just couldn't understand the passivity of these men. And really, when you look at David's response to what is going on, you see that David was able to act differently than all these other men because David had a different understanding and a different identity. He knew who his God was. He knew who he was. Therefore, he wasn't so fearful and passive when the enemy was standing in his way. See, the other men had swallowed the lie of Goliath and accepted, yes, we are servants of Saul. But David was able to act differently than all these other men because David said, no, we're actually God's army. Who are you to defy our God? Point two, David was able to not act passively and fearfully when the enemy was standing in his way because he trusted in the sovereignty of God. So a lot of times when we start thinking about God's sovereignty and the plan that God has for us, it can make us feel like we're just robots and things don't really matter because God already has a plan, and if God's already sovereignly ordained the future, then what's the point of living with faith right now in the present? Because it's just going to happen anyway. And the Bible completely denies that logic. It states that yes, God is sovereign, but the result of that is not that you should just act and not act because God has a plan. Rather, because God is sovereign, this should empower you to live with faith in the present. Because God has a plan, this should make you have peace about stepping out in faith as you walk in that plan that God has for you. So the Bible absolutely states that yes, God is sovereign and has a plan for each and every one of us, but in our sinfulness, we take that and make a wrong conclusion and say, well, it doesn't matter, so I'll passively wait because I'll just don't want to do anything because God has a plan and it doesn't matter. That's the wrong biblical response. The right biblical response is to say, yes, God is in control, therefore I can act in faith. Notice in 1 Samuel 17 verses 46 through 47, David is completely trusting in the sovereignty of God, and this is what empowers him to step out onto the battlefield in faith before the battle even starts. He says, "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that God is the God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with the sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." And in the same way, when we can trust the sovereignty of God and know that God has a good sovereign plan for our relationships or our singleness and our future marriage, this doesn't cause us to sit on the sideline. Rather, this empowers us to step on the battlefield, so to speak, and to step into the game and realize that I don't know the future, but I know God, and he holds the future and he holds me. So therefore I can act in faith. Point 3, if you want to overcome fear and passivity in Christian relationships and in Christian dating, you have to start moving before everything is perfect. Before you know how it's going to end, you have to move forward with God. I love in this story that David threatens Goliath. He says, I'm going to cut off your head. But the craziest part about this whole story is that when David said that, he wasn't even holding a sword. So what's my point here? I'm not saying that you just rush out onto the battlefield without a plan. When you read through the life of David, God was training David for this moment. He had trained him through fighting off bears and through fighting off lions. So I'm not saying you just throw caution to the wind in dating and relationships and just say, well, I don't really know how this is going to turn out. This looks like a really bad idea, but God is sovereign. He'll work it out, so I'm just going to go for it anyway. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is that if you wait for the perfect time, you're always going to be waiting. There's never a perfect time in life. You know, this isn't a perfect plan that David, organized every little thing so that he would be able to have the best strategic advantage and overcomplicated this whole process. Because he was trusting God, he knew that he could defeat the enemy because of God's power, not because of his own skill. So the point is, you have to stop being a perfectionist. The reason so many of us fear dating and relationships and have so much anxiety is because we think that it all depends on us. It really comes down to a works-based theology, if you really want to get down to the heart of it. We think that we need everything depends on our works and not God's grace. And so therefore, God has a plan, but I'm the one who has to fulfill that plan. And if I screw up one step of God's plan, I've completely ruined God's plan for my life. But that's starting from a false premise. The biblical approach is that God has a plan, and he accomplishes that plan not through my works, but through his grace, through his power. Therefore, yes, God has a plan, and yes, I need to follow him, but he's going to accomplish that plan, which frees me from having this fear of having to do everything so perfectly or else missing the will of God. We can overcome fear and anxiety in our dating and our Christian relationships when we trust that God is ultimately the one in control. I'm Mark from ApplyGodsWord.com. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, give us a thumbs up or leave us a comment in the comment section. What are your thoughts on overcoming fear and anxiety in Christian dating and relationships? Well, thanks for watching, and God bless.